Here we are, gathered in this conference room, the air thick with anticipation. Each of us carries our own burdens, stories we rarely share, worries we hide, hopes we barely admit even to ourselves. Most days we expect the routine, charts, graphs, project updates, the steady pulse of business. We come ready to talk numbers, analyze trends, solve problems that fit neatly into spreadsheets and slides. But today I want to share something that doesn't fit into a quarterly report. I want to tell you a story about my family, a story of struggle, pain, and the long, uneven road we took to find our way back to each other. It's a story that shaped who I am, both at home and here at work. It's about my granddad Rigel, a man whose presence was as heavy as it was mysterious. The hardest moments in life can teach us the most profound lessons, about forgiveness, about resilience, and about the quiet strength that comes from facing what terrifies us. We all have stories that shape us, even if we keep them hidden behind polite smiles and professional facades. Sometimes those stories are the very things that give us the empathy and understanding we need to connect with others. My story began when I was 16. Just me, my parents, and my little brother Sunset. We were a typical family, or so it seemed. Quiet dinners, small jokes, the gentle routines that make up a life. But even then I felt the weight of comparison. Sunset was always the one who needed more. More patience, more attention, more understanding. I resented it, even if I never said so aloud. We were ordinary until one phone call changed everything. The kind of call that makes the world tilt, that leaves you holding your breath, waiting for the next moment to make sense of what you've just heard. My granddad, Rigel, was coming to live with us. He brought with him a storm of memories, regrets, and pain that none of us were prepared to face. We didn't know what to expect, only that life as we knew it was about to change. The car ride to pick him up was silent, tense. My mum, Mia, stared out the window, her face tight with worry she tried to hide. My dad, Gary, gripped the wheel, his jaw set, judgment simmering just beneath the surface. I sat in the back, dreading what was to come, bitterness rising as I glanced at Sunset. Quiet, lost in his own world, as always. Even he seemed to sense the shift in the air. I barely knew Rigel, only the whispers and sad looks when his name came up. He was a shadow in our family history, someone spoken of in hushed tones, his story always just out of reach. He was more myth than man, a ghost from my mum's past, haunting the edges of our family's story. I wondered what secrets he carried, and why his return felt so heavy. Now, years later, I'm sharing this story with you because what we learn from our families, empathy, resilience, the courage to face difficult truths, shapes how we work and support each other, even in places like this. So let me take you back to that house, to the time when my family learned what it means to break and to heal. Because sometimes the stories we carry are the ones that help us build something stronger, together. Rigel returned, addiction and regret etched into every line of his face, clutching a battered suitcase. The stale scent of cigarettes trailed behind him, a reminder of years lost to old habits. He hovered in the hallway, unable to meet our eyes. To us, he was both familiar and impossibly distant, a father shaped by absence. Sunset's greeting was barely audible. Gary just nodded, taking the suitcase upstairs in silence. Gary retreated to his shed, sanding wood with obsessive focus, his way of managing the chaos, building barriers he could control. Sunset coped by cleaning and cooking, her movements precise, her anxiety barely contained beneath the surface. She spoke to Rigel only in careful, measured phrases, never venturing beyond the surface. Mia and I became observers, each of us neurodivergent in our own ways, watching the family's fragile balance shift. At dinner, Rigel sat apart, his silence heavy with remorse. The bitterness of his absence lingered, unspoken but ever present. The air thickened with what we couldn't say, years of pain, addiction, and regret pressing in on all sides. We all felt the gravity of his return, the weight of history settling over us once more. After Nigel left, addiction and regret trailing behind him, life with Rigel settled into a tense, fragile routine. Gary retreated to the spare room, the sharp scent of whiskey a silent confession he never voiced. Mia coped by baking, her hands busy, her eyes distant, denial layered thick as icing. Grandad Gary escaped to his shed, sanding wood for a birdhouse that never seemed finished, a ritual of regret and longing. Sunset, only 8, neurodivergent and sensitive, gravitated to Grandad, seeking connection in small, hopeful gestures. Rigel, closed off and unreachable, rarely let sunset in, but sunset's hope never faded. I, Summer, hid in books and music, building a fortress of fiction, my own neurodivergent sanctuary. We waited, each of us alone together, for the storm of regret to pass. The details stick with me. The way Rigel stared at blank screens, the clink of a glass at night, the silence that followed Nigel's absence. Addiction and regret had driven him away, leaving only shadows behind. We walked on eggshells, especially at dinner, where silence replaced laughter. Mia picked at her food, Gary asked questions that sounded rehearsed, Sunset's stories faded into quiet, her neurodivergence misunderstood, her voice lost in the hush. Rigel just ate, eyes down, as if we weren't there, his own wiring making connection impossible. I felt both pity and anger, pity for the pain addiction left behind, anger for the darkness that settled over us, for the way regret shaped every word left unsaid. Our home felt like a waiting room, all of us afraid to speak the truth, each of us neurodivergent in our own way. We communicated in sighs and slammed doors, protecting ourselves from the weight of his unhappiness and our own. We were a family held together by the thinnest of threads, resentment, hope, and the memory of what we'd lost. No one dared pull it. Addiction and regret had already taken so much from Nigel, but Sunset never stopped trying to reach him. Sunset would slip drawings under Nigel's door, quiet gestures, hoping for connection. Sometimes Nigel would pause, his face shadowed by memories he couldn't share. In rare moments, like in the garden, Sunset showing him stones, Nigel almost seemed present, but the distance never fully closed. I watched, caught between hope and dread, wanting to shield Sunset from the weight of Nigel's absence. Sunset believed, with the certainty only a child can have, that love could undo the damage. That hope left him exposed, unable to see the undertow beneath Nigel's silence. My parents, Mia and Gary, worried too, gently warning Sunset to give Nigel space. But their words never seemed enough. How do you explain to a neurodivergent child that some storms are too strong to weather together? We couldn't. So we waited, each of us carrying our own ache, hoping for something that might never return. The day it all fractured began like any other. The air was cool, the garden bathed in gentle light, and the world outside seemed calm, almost untouched by the tension and secrets that pressed against our walls. Birds chirped, dew clung to the grass, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as if the past could be forgotten. Nigel lingered outside, his presence heavy with regret. The scent of smoke drifted through the open door, a silent reminder of old habits he could never quite leave behind. Summer watched him, her mind racing with memories of broken promises and the ache of wanting to help but never knowing how. Inside, Mia's anxiety simmered just beneath the surface, her movements sharp and restless. Gary retreated into silence, his own pain masked by a stoic facade, unable to bridge the growing distance between them all. Sunset, ever sensitive to the undercurrents, sat quietly in the grass, humming to himself, his world a fragile bubble of routine and repetition. Summer joined him, her presence gentle, hoping to offer comfort without words. Nigel's addiction was a shadow that never left. Each attempt to quit ended in relapse, and the shame of it gnawed at him. He looked back at the house, knowing he was losing his family one day at a time. The arguments had become routine, Mia's voice sharp with accusation, Gary's with resignation. Summer recoiled from the noise, while Sunset pressed his hands to his ears, retreating further into himself. That morning, Nigel stood in the doorway, suitcase at his feet. The weight of addiction and regret pressed down on him, and he knew he could not stay. Summer's eyes met his, anger, disappointment and heartbreak all tangled together. Mia wept in the kitchen, her grief raw and unfiltered. Gary stared at the floor, unable to speak. Sunset rocked back and forth, tears streaming down his cheeks, unable to make sense of the chaos. Nigel left without a word, the garden path stretching before him, each step heavy with the knowledge that he could not undo the damage. Summer stood alone, arms wrapped tight, the silence between them now absolute. The garden, once a place of hope, now felt empty, echoing with the things left unsaid and the weight of what addiction had stolen from them all. The fragile threads holding us together finally snapped. Each of us retreated into our own silence, the break in our family's spirit as real as the frayed rope in the garden. In the quiet that followed, we all knew things would never be quite the same again. The garden and our family left in the aftermath, haunted by addiction, regret, and the silence that remained. After Nigel's relapse, our home was saturated with regret and confusion. Addiction had always been the shadow in our family, but this time it tore through the fragile peace we'd built. Gary tried to comfort Sunset, his frustration with Nigel simmering beneath the surface, his own neurodivergence making it hard to mask the intensity of his emotions. Mia stood in the kitchen, paralyzed, her mind racing through every memory, every warning sign she'd missed. She finally saw the depth of Nigel's pain and her own helplessness. Nigel sat alone, his body racked with sobs, the weight of his choices and the reality of his addiction pressing down on him. Regret was everywhere, inescapable. That night the dinner table was untouched. No one spoke. The silence was not just grief, but the heavy unspoken knowledge that love alone could not fix what was broken. My parents, Mia and Gary, finally spoke, voices low and urgent. They talked about rehab, about boundaries, about the limits of their own strength. For the first time, they admitted that this was bigger than any of us. I listened, neurodivergent in my own way, absorbing every word, every pause. It was the most honest conversation I'd ever witnessed. Raw, unsentimental, necessary. As dawn broke, a faint sense of resolve crept in. We stood together, not healed but aware. The breaking point had become a reckoning. We all knew something fundamental had to change. The truth was no longer avoidable. It was time to face the reality of addiction and what it had cost us. The next morning, Nigel came downstairs, his face drawn but his eyes clearer than they'd been in months. There was a heaviness in his movements, a kind of resignation but also a fragile resolve. The house, usually tense and brittle, felt suspended, each of us waiting, uncertain, bracing for what would come. Nigel admitted he was struggling with addiction. His words were halting, edged with shame and regret. He apologized for the chaos and pain he'd brought into our lives. Gary, my father, didn't hesitate. He simply said, "We'll help you." For a moment, the distance between us all seemed to shrink, replaced by something uncertain but real, the possibility of repair. Mia, my mother, acted immediately. Her hands shook as she dialed, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying exhaustion. She found a rehab center willing to take Nigel. For the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of hope in her expression, a cautious hope, shadowed by fear. The farewell was raw. Nigel clung to Mia, whispered a quiet apology to Sunset, who stood rigid and silent, her neurodivergence making the moment even more complex. He turned to me, Summer, and asked me to look after everyone. There were tears but also a muted relief, as if we were finally acknowledging the truth instead of hiding from it. We watched the taxi pull away, the silence in its wake thick with uncertainty. None of us spoke. The future was a blank page, and for the first time we allowed ourselves to imagine it might hold something other than dread. The storm had passed, but the air was heavy with what remained unsaid. Healing, we realized, isn't a single act. It's a process, uneven and slow, shaped by the choices we make every day. That experience didn't resolve everything. It left scars, on all of us. But it taught me, Summer, to look past the surface, to recognize the pain that drives people to the edge, and to respond with understanding rather than judgment. People are not defined by their worst decisions. I saw that in Nigel, and I've seen it in others since. Recovery is not guaranteed, but the possibility of change is real. Offering a second chance doesn't erase the past. It means choosing to believe in the possibility of something better, even when trust is fragile and the way forward is unclear. That's a lesson I carry with me, into every relationship, every uncertain beginning. We all need grace, and we all have the capacity to extend it, even when it's difficult. As a family, we learned that healing is possible, but it's never simple. It takes time, patience, and a willingness to confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. That's why I'm sharing this story, because maybe you, or someone you care about, is facing something similar. Maybe you need to know that regret doesn't have to be the end of the story. What we inherit from home, the love, the pain, the patterns, shapes us. It shapes how we respond to others and how we try to heal ourselves. Thank you for listening and for witnessing this part of our journey. Let's try to offer each other more understanding, more patience, and when we can, the chance to begin again.